Ladies and gentlemen, I am joined by Hung Lee, the curator of recruitingbrainfood.com, the biggest newsletter in the world of recruiting in the world right now. Hung, you probably read the most articles of maybe anyone in recruiting right now in the world, mainly on recruiting tech and the way it influences the world of talent acquisition. So, with everything that's going on, with the entire hype on AI, is it a hype or are we actually going to change things for the good, for the better, or whatever we're going to call it?
I don't want to say we're going to change it for the good, but it's changing, man. Whatever it is, it's happening. And we're not going to wait until people are comfortable with these changes. It's just happening right away. Of course, I'm talking about ChatGPT. People forget that this thing wasn't anybody using it 8 weeks ago, like no one knew. And now everybody is talking about it. Everyone is implementing it. Everyone is trying to do. It's changed the product roadmap for technology companies. It's every recruitment tech company I'm talking to has got this on their roadmap. And recruiter practitioners everywhere, this is the topic du jour. So there's no question in my mind, this is a major breakthrough technology. And it's going to have a transformative impact in the world of recruitment for sure.
All right, can you give some examples of how you think and where you think ChatGPT is going to influence the world of recruitment?
I think in the main, it is, if you think about how recruitment work has become over the last 10 years or so, for sure, it has become very much like an email job or an internet job. I think recruitment maybe back in the day, I don't know whether actually Bas, you ever did any recruitment in the early days, but certainly in the like early noughties, let's say late 90s, recruitment was still pretty much a telephone-based job, face-to-face type job. Those were the skills that a good recruiter needed to have. When the internet arrived and took over the communication channels, it became an email job. Your ability to sort of send an email was actually much more important. Your ability to use a search engine to find candidates, much more important. It became very much keyboard and screen. Now, what ChatGPT and related generative AI technologies are doing is making the essentially email work a lot more efficient. It's providing like times 10 productivity gains on things like writing a blog post. It is providing you with the ability to generate a job description in about 10 seconds worth of work, and doing so at a higher quality than the recruiter might have been able to produce themselves. It is providing the ability to personalize an email if you provide it with enough context about the person that you want to personalize it to, again, within seconds of producing within seconds of having that request. So the feedback loop is very, very short. It's not a case of saying, I want to have a request, wait 2 weeks for something to come back. No, it is happening immediately in front of your eyes. And secondly, the outputs are actually oftentimes significantly better than what you could have come up with yourself. In which case, every part of the recruitment sort of process, which involves producing text, is now, if you like, you can apply some chat GPT to it and it will produce something better. So huge change, huge sort of opportunity and risk for recruiters.
So you expect that your ATS or plugins in the ATS will be able to write. We're not going to have templates, but we're going to have ChatGPT actually write the rejection email. You check it and you send it. So we're going more to augmenting technology as humans, as then actually doing the actual grunt work ourselves.
It's a really interesting distinction and important distinction you make. I think you're right. The templating era is over. So the idea when you've got a preset template that you might then make modifications on, which is generally how we've done customization and personalization to date, out of the window. What generative AI does is generate the thing from scratch. It's It's totally new in the sense that it's not been created before, but it's doing it from information that's already been pre-trained on. That's what the P stands for in ChatGPT. It's pre-trained transformer. So it's already been trained by the company, essentially by OpenAI or whatever sort of company that you're dealing with, on how to respond to these inputs and textual inputs or prompts you're giving it. And it will produce essentially a much fresher customization than a template would. A template is naturally quite rigid. You can swap the name out, right? If I'm sending, hey, a hi first name type of a mail merge, there's limitations to my ability to change the syntax or the sentence order or whatever it is. Otherwise, I might as well just write it from scratch myself. Now, what generative AI does, it does actually write it from scratch. But it does it obviously with automation. It's much faster than human typing, and it's going to come out with a much fresher product. So the reality is the output that you're getting in terms of personalization, I think, will be significantly better than what we've seen before.
All right, so that's aside from the recruitment towards the candidate. Now, the other side we've heard a lot of stories about as well, candidates using ChatGPT to apply. I think it passed a level 3 coding test at some point, which is really interesting. Should we be augmenting our selection process to things that ChatGPT can't do in order to actually see if a candidate does this? Or is it that if ChatGPT can do it, that means we probably won't need a candidate, because if you pass your selection process, either your selection process is bad or it's an automated a job which we can automate.
That's a really great distinction. I think you're right on both counts. You know, if you're testing for stuff that the machine can do already, then why the heck, you know, do you need the person? Very valid point. I think on the recruiting side, though, you're quite right. Candidates are obviously using ChatGPT as well, and they should. It's obviously going to improve their chances. What it is done in terms of recruiting, it might actually be a more radical impact in terms of what we need to do. We need to simply scrap multiple elements of the recruiting process, because we can no longer trust the information we're getting. The cover letter, for instance, get rid of it. There's no chance that's going to be of any value today after ChatGPT. Limited value before, but now there's no way you can trust that that is of any value. Same with the CV. Is the CV any good? And we literally pointless. You can just pipe it in to ChatGPT and say, hey, listen, here's the job description I'm applying for. Please write me a CV with that is perfectly adapted to that job, with sort of my background and skills sort of melded in, and it will produce that in. So you've got to get rid of that. The take-home tech exercise, that's done. You can no longer use this. You need to have a new way of testing technical skills. So yeah, there's all kinds of traditional ways in which we kind of would assess candidates. We simply have to throw them out the window. No longer even possible to use them as an input in your decision making.
All right, let me challenge that for a moment, because we've always said tech skills are important to have. You know, we used to put proficiency with Word and Excel on our resumes, which is a tech skill. Now, a take-home coding assessment, which can be done by ChatGPT, but still you have to check if the tool did it right, and you probably have to augment something. Isn't it actually more valuable? Because now you can see if somebody actually really understands it and really is able to use the technology to be a good developer. Because I always love people who are able to do it in as less time as possible, because they use the right tools to build it upon.
I think you're right on that to a certain degree, but then you'll have to measure the amount of time that person's taken to do it. So I think you're totally right. Let's say I provide the person with the test, and I say, okay, this usually is a 2-hour test to do your coding example, but you can use ChatGPT. It's actually a 2-minute test, and they're able to execute it. Great, maybe a valid response. But the take-home exercise typically was an instruction that was off-platform. It was like an email instruction or a document. Build this thing in whatever time you have, and oftentimes the best practice would be to say they can do it take as long as they want. These days, they have so many different ways to improve the result that you can't really tell whether that person has produced it or whether the machine has produced it. Now, you can then argue, okay, in the future, the modern software developer will exactly be this type of person. They won't actually be typing a lot of code, but instead there'll be, if you like, a code editor. They'll be curating the code, they'll be chopping it, editing it, making sure it fits in perfectly, etc. Maybe that's a slightly different skill set you could assess for. But I think what will happen is that we're going to go and trust more real-time testing than we previously have done with asynchronous testing. And I think that concept applies to almost every single aspect of assessment. So leaving aside code, for instance, once upon a time, it probably wouldn't be too difficult. One of the ways you would test a marketing person might be to say, okay, come up with a marketing plan for go to market on this product. You got a weekend to do a presentation. I would imagine that is no longer a valid way to test that individual unless you have a synchronous way to discuss it. So we're going to go back to a more human interaction. I think the interview is going to be more important. I think there'll be maybe a working exercise, a collaboration exercise between the two parties where you could get some surface of what's going on. Those would be the more significant ways in which we assess a candidate, rather than asynchronously, I send you something, you do whatever you need to black box it, and I come back and just look at the results. I don't think that mechanism is going to work too well with generative AI technology.
Interesting. All right, so final question, because we're already touching on selection and AI in selection now. Let's move away from the ChatGPT and the generative AI. What other trends do you see when it comes to AI in recruitment, and maybe, since we're already talking about selection, especially the selection part?
I think there's been like pre-ChatGPT, there were already controversies about AI and the role it plays in the assessment process. Because there have been a number of critics about the usage of this technology or this classification of technologies, and typically the argument against, I think, could be described as it's inherently biased, and there's ways in which it can be abused because it's going on historical data, for instance. And if so, you're not going to do a great job of, let's say, diversifying your workforce if your historical data has meant that the people you've recruited have been generally more homogenous. So there's been a lot of DE&I kind of related critiques of the use of AI in assessment. Now, I think you and I we've had conversations on this before, Bas, so I suspect you and I actually are quite well aligned on this, in the sense that we both think that AI may be a little bit unfairly maligned in this part because the real comparator is how would a human being do it, and in fact the human being would be as biased, if not more so. So removing the technology doesn't actually remove the bias, it simply shifts it back to human beings, which, guess what, historically we've not been great at doing this. So I would hope that we would mature the conversation in some way to the point where we're able to think intelligently about the use of technology to create a fairer, more objective kind of outputs, whilst being mindful of how that data has been, how the AI has been trained, basically. So if you've trained the AI on historical data from a company, and you've decided that, okay, here's the pattern of what a good candidate looks like, your company happens to have a demographic of this sort of type, then guess what? You're probably going to end up replicating the same kind of talent pipeline, and that may not align with your new objectives of diversifying the workforce. So I think, we need a bit of maturation. I would hate for us to overcorrect with criticizing AI and actually start legislating against. I know in certain places that is already happening. I believe New York, for instance, certain states in the US seem to be pretty much saying, okay, you can't actually use this technology, or if you do, you're suddenly subject to all kinds of audit and bureaucratic responsibilities, which you can, totally understand that companies are just going to say, screw it, we can't afford to go through the administrative load of using these technologies. I hope we don't go there, because in reality, a human being is a deeply flawed assessor. And we're not going to solve the bias problem by getting rid of tech and just having humans do it. We need help.
Thank you for your insights, and everybody watching, I hope you enjoyed this inspirational video, and look at some of the other ones in our digital event. Thank you, Hung.